This is episode 50 of the Life in Norway show. High up in the country's far northeastern corner, Norway shares a border with both Finland and Russia. From political tensions to energy and climate change, the Barents region is full of fascinating stories. Since 2002, the Barents Observer has been reporting from the region in both English and Russian. Today I'm joined by its editor, Thomas Nilsen. We talk about some of the big issues in the High North, Norway's relationship with Russia, and what it's like to live within a few miles of the borders. You can find out more information on today's show on the show notes page. Head on over to lifeinnorway.net/podcast and look for episode 50. Happy listening. I'm joined today by Thomas Nilsen. He is the Norwegian editor of the Barents Observer, a newspaper, an online newspaper based in Finnmark in the far north of Norway. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
First question, what brings a Norwegian to that part of the world to work as a journalist? I feel you must have an interesting background story.
I have many background stories. The most important here is that Kirkenes, where the Barents Observer is based, is one of the most fascinating places to do Arctic journalism. And I'm very interested, I've always been that, about the High North, about the Arctic. And here at our news desk, we are living only 15 minutes from Russia's Kola Peninsula. And it takes some half an hour drive to the west, and then we are in the European Union and Finland. And if I go by boat, I have an hour sailing to the north. I'm out in the Barents Sea, so it's a fantastic good place to be as a journalist. It's happening a lot here. Big geopolitics, climate changes, businesses, etc. Everything you want to learn about the north. So. It's a good place. And also, I have to admit, I love being out in the nature, as many other Norwegians. So Finnmark, the top of Norway, is great, especially from now on, where March, the spring period, the summer, and so on.
So I've actually been to Kirkenes 3 times. It's a fascinating place. I'm really intrigued by what it must be like to live up there. But first of all, a lot of my listeners, unless they've been on the Hurtigruten, they won't probably know where it is. So you've hinted at it there, but could you just introduce the region to us? Someone who lives in that part of Finnmark, do they feel Norwegian, or is there a kind of Barents identity? Or how would you describe the region to an outsider?
This is very much Norway. So it's a Norwegian region, but it hasn't always been like that. The town of Kirkenes, probably the Norwegians were some of the last to move in here. If you go 100 years back in history, these were mainly Sami and people from northern Finland that moved out to this part to be part of the cod fisheries in the Barents Sea. But with the mining industry coming to Kirkenes around the year 1900, also the Norwegians moved in, and with Norway getting its independence from Sweden in 1905, it was important for the Norwegian government to establish this as a part of Norway. So they build schools, they build churches, and so on. So today it's very much Norwegian area. Well, there are people also calling it the capital of the Barents region, Kirkenes, but I don't think too many are talking about the Barents identity. Yes, people think it's cool to stay close to Russia. It's cool to be close to Finland and so on. But not exactly a Barents identity. Maybe it's Norwegians in a borderland.
How far across the border into Russia do you need to go until you get to let's say a town of substance? Is Murmansk the first place, or are there smaller towns closer to Norway?
There are smaller towns closer to Norway, but Murmansk is our Copenhagen. Now, you know, people in Oslo, they take the ferry over to Copenhagen for the weekend to buy some tax-free and see some culture and so on. People up here, they travel to Murmansk. That's in summertime, it's a 3-hour drive from Kirkenes to downtown Murmansk, where you have everything. You have the symphony orchestra, you have the ballet, you have the theaters, you have nightclubs, very good restaurants, and a city of 300,000 people. So that's it. But we also have closer cities like the infamous town of Nikkel, which was a very polluted town due to its heavy industry and so on. But it's actually not that much to do there. You can go there to fill cheap gas, but they don't have what Murmansk has.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the newspaper or the news service. It's online only, is that right?
The Barents Observer has always been only online. Yes,
okay.
we're based in Kirkenes, but we write for an international audience. So then online has been the main focus for us.
Yeah, so this has always fascinated me about the news service. I frequently include some of your stories in my weekly newsletter on life in Norway, because I never really hear about such cross-border issues from, let's say, a local expert. It's normally someone in Oslo or Copenhagen writing about something going on in the high north. But you have this extremely local viewpoint. You also publish at least some, maybe all stories in Russian as well. And I seem to remember from memory that you can speak Russian yourself. Is that right?
I'm not very good, but I read Russian and I managed to get around, yes.
Okay. So my question really is, why is the Barents Observer needed in such a small, sparsely populated part of the world?
It was my colleague Atle Staalesen who founded Barents Observer back in 2002. And he did that exactly because what you are saying, mainly in the media, when you have stories from the High North, it is the correspondents in Oslo or in Moscow who is writing about it. So he thought that he could bring some added value to journalism by focusing on cross-border between Russia and the Nordic countries up here in the north, written from a local level and about local issues. So we are kind of the opposite of parachuting journalism. I used to say when the CNN is flying into Kirkenes to cover the refugee crisis we had up here back in 2015, we as a joke, call it parachute journalism, because they come in, they go to the border, they get their footage, and then 6 hours later they are on a plane back again. Well, we are doing the opposite. We are based here, and we can probably see stories from a broader perspective. And then the Barents Observer has always translated all our articles into Russian. So our Russian readers, our Russian audience is very, very important. And we hope that this brings added exchange of information across formerly closed borders.
That's fascinating. So the readers in Russia, do they tend to be from the Murmansk area and the Kola Peninsula, or are they all over Russia? You have readers in Moscow as well?
The majority of our readers are in Moscow. But that is actually the same in Norway. We have many more readers in Oslo than we have locally up here in the north. Maybe very logical because there ain't that many people living up in the north. So capitals we have many more readers there. That said, the Barents Observer has always valued freedom of speech, and we have always said that we want to be providing space for non-governmental organizations and opposition groups and everyone of those who doesn't necessarily have an open door to Russian state media. So that has, of course, caused trouble for us in recent years. So right now we are the only newspaper in the Nordic countries that are blocked by Russia's censorship agency, the media agency. But Russia and China are quite different. China do manage to block foreign media, while in Russia, technically, they have bigger troubles with that. So we are trying to surpass and climb over the censorship wall and to we partly succeed in that. So we still have many readers in Russia, in Murmansk, in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, mainly the western part of Russia.
I want to ask about the topics that you cover in more detail. Press freedom is definitely one of them. Climate change is an increasingly important one in your part of the world. But let's start with security, because I think the majority of my listeners will know that there have been a lot of tensions in the northern part of Europe in recent years, growing tensions, one might say, between Russia and not necessarily Norway specifically, but NATO, certainly. What is it like on the ground for you covering these, not conflict is the wrong word, but tension in the region? Do you, as a journalist in Kirkenes, do you take a Norwegian perspective on these issues? Do you take the Russian perspective? Is it possible to be neutral with these issues? How do you go about reporting on this situation?
Security issues is very difficult. We, as journalists, we try to have a neutral view on everything we write. But that said, the information warfare that currently can be seen many places, of course, also influence the way we write. On the ground here in Kirkenes, when I walk out in the border areas, this is a very peaceful area. Normally, when it's not coronavirus times, there is a lot of Russians coming to Kirkenes for shopping, and there's a lot of Norwegians who go to Murmansk for meeting friends and go to nightclubs and eat good food and so on. So on the ground, it's a very peaceful and very good neighborhood between people. But of course, as you say, Norway is neighboring a very militarized area. And that militarized area, Russia's Kola Peninsula, is not militarized because Norway is the neighbor, but it's very militarized because this is the place where Russia have access to open waters to the North Atlantic. So they have chosen to base their ballistic missile submarines there. And they are, of course, doing whatever it takes to protect those ballistic missile submarines. And as a consequence of higher tensions between NATO and Russia, mainly between the United States and Russia, we see more tensions out in the Arctic. We see more military flights by bombers. We see more sailings by submarine and surface warships out in the Barents Sea, both from Russia and from the NATO side. So we don't see it on the street, but we feel that we are living in a period of time with sharply increasing tensions.
Fascinating. Looking medium term, let's say 5 to 10 years ahead, are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, I've been covering, as a journalist, I've been covering Russia for about 30 years. I first traveled to Russia as a journalist back in 1989. Those days, the name of the country was the Soviet Union. And I have learned never to predict about the future, because I've tried that before and I've been wrong. Back in 1989, I could absolutely not imagine that the Soviet Union would collapse. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I could never, ever imagine the anarchist kind of society that developed under the early years of Boris Yeltsin. And in the 1990s, I could never predict the huge economic growth in Russia in the early 2000s. And in the early 2000s, when Norway and Russia were talking about joint development of oil and gas fields in the Barents Sea and very good neighboring relations, I could never predict that we would be neighboring a totalitarian regime like we are seeing with today's Vladimir Putin's Russia. So hopefully 5 years from now, things will normalize, and that will kind of put an end to this arms race that we are seeing again, the kind of Cold War 2.0. But there are not that many signs about that right now. But, in Russia, Alexei Navalny is in prison today. He's the most prominent opposition politicians. Just like in 1991, Václav Havel was in prison in Czech Republic, and by the end of 1991 he was president. So I don't want to predict, but I'm always an optimist.
Something, however, that probably isn't going to improve in the next 5 to 10 years is the climate situation. And for someone living elsewhere in the world, they may not be aware that the effects of climate change are absolutely being felt in the high north, most notably on Svalbard, but I think also in the Finnmark area. So I guess more and more of your reporting has covered these environmental issues lately.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And the climate crisis is very visible in the Arctic, warming not only 2 times as fast as the rest of the globe, which is a way of framing it in global media before, but 3 times higher temperatures in the Arctic on average the last few years compared with the rest of the world. And this is influencing many things. Of course, it's sad for the permafrost and for the polar bears and for the ice cap of the Arctic and so on. But it's not only influencing nature, it's also influencing businesses with more shipping across the Arctic Ocean between Asia and Europe, with more investments into oil and gas, both on the Norwegian side, but also in northern Russia. So climate changes has always been an important topic for the Barents Observer to cover, and that will for guaranteed not be less important in the years to come. What we see is dramatic. I mean, I was visiting Longyearbyen and Svalbard last year, and seeing the houses that are sagging in the permafrost. Wow, it's scary. It goes fast.
And of course, going hand in hand with climate change is energy. And this is a very interesting region for energy as well. And whilst you've been talking, Thomas, I'm actually looking through the current front page of the Barents Observer and seeing several energy stories, and such as a potential wind farm on the northern coast. And you also mentioned the closure, I think, of one of the big industrial plants just across the border in Russia. And actually, one of my first trips, the first time I visited the region, was actually to the mine, the Sydvaranger mine, just a few miles south of Kirkenes, which I think has closed now, or at least it closed for a time, if not permanently. So it does seem as if there's, let's say, a greener shift going on in the area. But I also see on the homepage, Equinor finds more Barents oil. So there is still oil drilling going on in the Barents Sea. So again, what's the balance like in the region right now? It seems like there are green steps being taken, but the oil exploration continues.
I think we are in 2021 is really a year of shifting focus. The Norwegians have been drilling the Barents Sea for more than 20 years, and mainly without results. There are very few discoveries of oil. There are a few of gas, but that is very far from the market, so it's not that economically interesting. But they have discovered very little oil in the Barents Sea, and one of the main reasons for the oil companies to continue drilling in the Barents Sea is because of the Norwegian tax system, which gives the oil companies 80%, where they can take off from the tax for drilling and exploring for oil. And then they pay back, of course, high taxes when they start production and so on. But the Norwegian tax system really encourages oil companies to continue drilling, and that is the main reason now for drilling going on. Drilling in the Arctic, production of oil in the Arctic is way more expensive than in other areas. And with oil prices as low as $50, $60, as we have seen over the last year, it is not very profitable to continue development of the Arctic. So for those who think the Arctic is big oil and that there is a lot of oil drilling coming and production in the years to come, I think they will be disappointed. The oil companies will move out of this area. for both reasons. It's not economical profitable, and there is very little oil in the Norwegian part of the Barents Sea. On the other side, we see another industrial revolution going on not only in northern Norway, we see it as well in northern Sweden and in northern Finland. And that is the mining for metals, for batteries to power the electric vehicles, electric ferries, and all this green shift we are seeing. So the biggest investments right now is a battery factory in Mo I Rana, which is going to provide some 3,000 new workplaces. There is a similar very big battery factory in Skellefteå, northern Sweden. Another 3,000 employees are going to start working there by the end of this year, 2021. And we also see that Nornickel, which is the biggest metallurgical company in Russia, have teamed up with partners in Europe to build battery production facilities in northern Finland. So the green shift is absolutely focusing here in the high north. And one of the reasons why all these battery companies want to establish themselves in northern part of Scandinavia is because of the renewable energy. Cheap and loads of renewable energy with new wind farms, hydropower, etc., etc. So it is a focus away from the black economy to the more green economy.
I think we could do a whole show on any one of these topics that we've discussed so far. So there is one more issue I want to touch on. We already have, which is press freedom. This is something that's pretty fundamental in Norway. But as you're covering a lot of issues that take place in Russia, how does it work? Pre-corona, I guess, because right now there are travel restrictions in place, but you would travel a lot into Russia. Was there ever any major issues for you? Do you feel safe when you're out on reporting in Moscow or in Murmansk?
Well, I have never felt threatened by traveling as a journalist in northern part of Russia. Northern part of Russia is mainly a very peaceful area, but we are also here seeing big shifts. Media freedom in Russia is not an easy task for the time being. So me personally, for instance, I'm a persona non grata in Russia because of the work we're doing with the Barents Observer. And the Barents Observer is blocked in Russia. And I think the main reason for that is not because we are more critical than any other media, but it is because we are publishing in Russian language. And we have our newsroom located outside of Russia. So Russia's security police, the FSB, cannot directly interfere into our reporting, as they are doing with not all, but most of our colleagues in Russia. There are very few independent media in Russia at all, and nearly nobody in northern part of Russia. So this is a very negative trend. We have seen that in recent weeks, Russia are threatening to shut down Twitter, threatening to shut down Facebook, and they have already put a ban on LinkedIn because those companies, those social media companies of North America and Europe, do not let the Russian censorship agencies to enter their servers to check who is writing what and what they are publishing and so on. So press freedom has become one of the most important reasons why we still run the Barents Observer. We think that we will never ever let any authorities trying to censor us succeed. So, but it is difficult to work as a journalist in this area. And earlier in the show we talked about the security situation in the high Arctic, and one of the troubles we have is that when something happens on the Russian side, a Russian naval vessel sailing someplace and so on, when I call the press officer at the Russian Northern Fleet, he just said, "Oh, sorry, Thomas, I cannot talk to you because I'm no longer allowed to talk to foreign correspondents. You have to send a letter with your question to the Russian Ministry of Defense in Moscow." And when I do that, I never get answer. Or maybe I get an answer in written after 3 weeks. But if there is a submarine on fire, I don't want the answer 3 weeks later. And that is a challenge. It's a challenge that we don't have access, and that we have to rely on second-hand sources.
Yeah, you mentioned that one of the main reasons you feel that the publication is banned in Russia is that you publish in Russian. But of course, you also publish in English, and I don't think we actually made that clear at the beginning of the show, that this is an English and Russian publication. It's not Norwegian and Russian. You're actually publishing in English, which is one of the big reasons I wanted to talk to you today. So not only are you publishing in Russian so that people in Russia can read, you're also publishing in English so that people all around the world can read as well. It's not just a localized thing for Norway. So I just wanted to highlight that a little bit. On the language issue, I want to take a complete sidestep now and just talk about the area once again. What fascinated me the first time that I visited Kirkenes was the bilingual nature of the town. The street signs, most of the street signs, you see the name of the street in Norwegian and then underneath in Russian. Many of the stores have I presume they're advertising sales. I don't know, but they're in Russian, in Cyrillic, so I can't read them. This is totally unique in Norway. Often you see English language signs around here in Trondheim, for example, but to see Norwegian and Russian, that says a lot about what it must be like to live in the town. So what is it like day to day in Kirkenes? Do you interact with a lot of Russians on a daily basis, or is it more? Is that infrastructure there for people that visit on the weekend and then they go back to Russia to work in the week?
Normally, when we are not in Corona times with closed borders and so on, there are always hundreds of Russians traveling in from the Murmansk region and the border areas for shopping on the Norwegian side. And the Russians, they are coming to Kirkenes for shopping for the very same reasons as people in Oslo go to Svinesund or to the Swedish side of the border for shopping. They do it because something is cheaper. There are some goods that are not available in Russia but are available in Norway. When you buy a Levi's in Kirkenes, you know that you get a Levi's and not something else like you get in Murmansk. And they do it for the tour. It's cool. What are we going to do on Saturday? Well, we go to neighboring Norway. And this is something that is very, very good between Norwegian and Russian authorities. They have facilitated for very easy visa for Russians. And I think that the northern part of Norway is one of the easiest areas for Russians to get a Schengen visa all over, maybe together with Finland. So the first time a Russian want to travel to Norway, they get a single entry visa. But if they don't violate any laws, which nobody violates laws when they are going shopping, then they can apply for a multiple entry visa and up to 5 years valid. So there is a huge part of the population in the Murmansk region which have a 5-year multiple entry visa to Norway. So and the roads are good, and it doesn't take that long time. So especially Saturdays is a good time to travel. And this has caused that there are many more shops in Kirkenes than the population size of the town should explain. So there are many chains that have established themselves in Kirkenes because of the Russian market. And I don't think there is one single shop in the town that doesn't have at least one Russian-speaking employee ready to serve the Russian customers. So it is a multilingual town. I see at the school with my children that are, of course, second generation Russians that are living in Kirkenes in the school classes. And I think everyone here at least can count to 10 in Russian and say "Do svidaniya" and "Privyet" and all these polite phrases that they do in the same way as in Murmansk. They facilitate for Norwegians that are coming. But you see, you say bilingual. It's better than that, because there are also a lot of Finnish and Sami languages that you can see on street signs, geographical names, and even some people speaking that in their daily life. So it's a kind of multinational little corner in the very, very far north of Norway.
I hadn't appreciated that until you said it, but there really are so many shops and stores, considering the size of the town, which is maybe 3,000-4,000 people, something like that. And yet the shops that are there are pretty much the same as you would find in a town of like 25,000 people elsewhere in Norway. You have out-of-town stores there, pretty much every supermarket brand there, a shopping mall in the centre of the town. Yeah, that's very interesting. And that brings me on to one of my last questions, which is, what do people do for a living in the region now that mining and other industry is sort of winding down? Are people all working in shops and the service industry, or are there other industries in the area?
Well, it's in this coronavirus times, there are challenges in really all kind of businesses. But you're correct. Kirkenes was, first of all, it was a mining town. So the majority of the people worked in the mine, which the state closed down in '96, and then it was re-established by some private investors later on, and that went bankrupt. And right now there is no mining at all. But there is one business that have really got a lot of new employees and that are skyrocketing if we look away from the coronavirus time, and that is tourism, and especially winter tourism. We have a snow hotel here in Kirkenes where people are flying in from Asia, from Europe, from North America to stay in a snow hotel for one night and ride with dog sledding and walk out and watch the polar night with the northern lights and so on in winter and the midnight sun in the summer and so on. So tourism has really exploded in the kind of the last 6-7 years, and I think that is the single most important private industry in northernmost Norway now is tourism, and especially winter tourism. People want to see snow.
Excellent. Thomas, thanks for joining me today. I have my standard questions that I ask every guest at the end of the show. I am going to adapt them slightly, though. For one thing, because you're Norwegian, a lot of my guests typically are foreigners living in Norway. But the other reason is that you live in such a unique part of the country. So some quick answers to these, please. What's the best thing about living in Finnmark?
The nature. I could walk out of my house and then 30 seconds later I'm up in the mountain, and I can go skiing in the winter and bushwalking by foot in the summer without having to drive somewhere to do it and so on. I just walk straight out of my house and I'm in the wilderness.
Okay, and the most challenging thing about living in Finnmark?
I'm starting to. I'm not a teenager anymore, so I have to be honest and say that December and January, that is the most challenging period for me. I mean, I love snow, I love winter. I can adapt to minus 30 degrees Celsius, no problem. But the darkness, the polar night, that is only one way to survive, and that's looking at the calendar and cross off day by day, and one day the sun will be back. Here in Kirkenes, it comes back in the late January.
So I do appreciate the issue with the darkness. I mean, it doesn't get anywhere near as dark in Trondheim, but I do understand. But do you really prefer the minus 30 temperature to it being dark all the time?
Absolutely, because minus 30, it's just a question about clothing, what right. You put on in the morning. But the darkness, wow, yeah.
That
so,
is.
But it's good right now. It's we are in mid-March, so no, actually the daylight is longer than the night and the darkness. So.
It is a wonderfully typically Norwegian answer, Thomas. Thank you very much for that. And last of all, your favourite place in Finnmark. Where do you like to go when you're relaxing?
In Finnmark, the good thing here is that we are living by the coast. So getting out in the fjord to some of the remote areas there, go for fishing, or also. The other way, go away from the coast, go into the Pacific Valley with all the taiga forest and wildlife we can see there. The good thing here is that you can choose. One weekend you go to by the far coast, or you can go up in the mountain, or you can go to the taiga forest. So it's the total nature part here.
And is there anywhere else in Norway that feels like home to you, or a special place so you might have a cabin somewhere?
You know, I'm born and I spent my first years on the area which is called Helgeland, which is between Bodø and Trondheim, middle part of Norway, around the Arctic Circle. And I really like the coast of Helgeland. That's the secret pearl of northern Norway. I mean, Lofoten Islands and the archipelago of Lofoten is making headlines in travel magazines around the world. But between you and me, it's a secret. The Helgeland coast is even better.
I won't tell anyone. Thomas, thanks for joining me today. This has been truly fascinating. You have a really interesting job and a really important one too. So thank you for not just you, but your whole team and all the work you do up there. It is really a service that's needed. Where can people find out more about you and the newspaper?
The newspaper is online on thebarentsobserver.com, and there you can choose between the English language and the Russian language. So, but if you're coming from a European or North American country or Norway, you get automatically into to the English language site at thebarentsobserver.com.
That's
and
great.
It's free of charge. So
and it's free.
We don't have any paywalls and so on. So go in, check out what we are writing about. This is really a fascinating part of northern Norway.
And that's actually very unusual these days for a Norwegian news publication to not have a paywall. So that's another reason to go check out thebarentsobserver.com wherever you live. Thomas, thanks for joining me today. You can find out more information about everything we've talked about on the show notes page, which you'll find at lifeinnorway.net/podcast. Thomas, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.